is Media Week.
Hi there, welcome to the programme. Ahead, we have news.com.au Editor-in-Chief David Penberthy chatting to us about the changing world of online media, and as well, news.com.au's revamp. We've also got Kim Kardashian's wedding cover for Who magazine, setting a new sales record, so we've got lots to chat about, as well as which shows ruled the small screen for the week. And of course, joining us in the studio, our co-host for the half hour, James Manning, editor and publisher of Media Week. James, welcome to the show again.
Hi, Nadine.
Listen, there's a bit of news out today. We have News Limited coming through and confirming reports from earlier in the week that it's looking to cut costs by about 20% over the next 3 years.
Yeah, and they're also putting a freeze on hiring new staff. People who leave apparently won't be replaced. I guess the real news would have been here if they weren't going to do that, you know, because I guess right across the business sectors, that's a huge focus on costs. I mean, there always is, but particularly in this climate. We've heard a lot this year about Fairfax cutting costs, keeping, watching their bottom line very closely. APN as well, another big publisher in Australia and in New Zealand, also got a massive focus on costs. So I guess it's really no surprise that it's going to happen to the biggest publisher too. Yeah,
if you were working in a newsroom, you'd be foolish to think that it wasn't going to happen to
particularly, especially in the print business. There's a lot of pressures there. We've talked about them often on the show. The move across to digital as well. How's that impacting the business, and where there is sort of funds for expansion, and perhaps they're going to be put into that area.
Well, and that's the interesting part, is that they actually have come out and said that this will be the focus, that the cash savings generated will be put to digital media. Again, I guess it's just part of this trend that we're seeing, the separation between, or I guess the more divide that's coming in between the news, the traditional print, and then digital.
Yeah, everyone knows it's sort of coming. The big question is how quickly and when will it take over eventually.
That kind of brings us to our first guest on the programme today. News.com.au, as I mentioned, this week launched a revamped homepage with what it's calling a fresh and simple design. The radical redesign leaves more room for top stories, separates news from feature-driven content, and presents news.com.au journalists more prominently. And for more on the new look for spring, I guess you could say, we're joined by David Penberthy. He's the editor-in-chief of news.com.au, as well as The Punch, and he's joining us from Adelaide. David, thanks so much for joining us. I think you've heard what we were just chatting about, this push toward digital. Is the sort of revamp of news.com.au sort of part and parcel of that, making it more of a digital play and less a part of, the masthead?
Well, news.com.au is in an interesting position because unlike our masthead sites, sites such as dailytelegraph.com.au, theaustralian.com.au, news.com.au has never actually been a newspaper at all. And we have some 600,000 unique browsers a day, and the overwhelming majority of our readers are people under the age of 40. We're particularly strong in the sort of 18 to 35-year-old category. And for a lot of those people, whether old former print dinosaurs like myself like it or not, a lot of those people have either abandoned the newspaper reading habit or, in a lot of cases, never had the newspaper reading habit in the first place. So I guess the key thing we were trying to achieve with the redesign of news.com this week was to make it look significantly less newspapery. I think that there's a lot of websites across the world which look like newspapers that have been hammered into the shape of a website. And what we were trying to do with the use of more white space, with the changes that we made to some of the typefaces, and certainly with the changes that we made to the way we're displaying some of our features and lifestyle content, was to maintain our commitment to hard news. I mean, it's not called news.com for no reason. We are a news website. But there are different ways of presenting and tackling and executing big, hard news stories that I think can fit better with that younger audience that has no love or relationship for print.
David, they're pretty impressive figures, and I guess that you've built that up. I'd hate to think how much you would have paid in traditional media to try and get that sort of audience, and I guess you got it by spending a bit less. Is the site going to become a bit like the MX of online, in a way?
Well, look, I think MX is it's a good analogy, James, because if you think about MX, I mean, MX was designed for a few reasons. Obviously, to cater for the fast-moving younger commuter market. You know, it's a sort of 4 or 5 stop read if you're getting on at Central and getting off at Petersham. You know, it's a breezy, lighter read, and it was also designed in the hope that it could encourage a print reading habit in some younger readers whose parents might have got the paper, but who were under no real, you know, had no real love affair with print themselves. So, you know, there's quite a high degree of overlap between the MX readership and the news.com readership. So it's a good analogy to make there, because our audience does skew younger, much more diverse in their views. You know, they're pretty optimistic about things. They're very mobile, and I think that the work that we've done with the site reflects the type of lifestyle that our target audience leads.
And David, you know, is that the sort of key? I mean, do you risk alienating certain demographics, or is that the difference between digital media, that you really have to know your market and go after it and really appeal to it?
Yeah, look, I think obviously you've got to have a very clear idea in your mind as to who your audience is. And, you know, I don't think that there's anything in the newlooknews.com which would necessarily alienate an older reader who has grown up with print and has grown up with the newspaper reading habit. But, you know, what often happens is that, you know, for us, news.com, we're sort of like the national tabloid. And you know, given I'm the former editor of the Daily Telegraph, I'm quite clearly not using the word tabloid as a pejorative term. I'm proudly a tabloid person. And, you know, the Australian as a website goes after that very sort of high-end, highly educated, very affluent corner of the market, and we're sort of the entry point for the general reader on the national stage. And, you know, I think that what we're seeing increasingly is that there are some people who might have a very passionate relationship with a website here in my hometown, such as Adelaide Now. They want to get their local football news, they want to get local celebrity stories, but for a lot of national stories, they'll also come to a site such as news.com. So, you know, most people jump around from different websites. A lot of people access news on the basis of Google search recommendations and have no particularly strong loyalty to any website anyway. So I think that, you know, readers are smart enough to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, and a lot of them will look at us, but they'll also look at other people too.
Just expand on that content that they're after a little bit more. Is it an audience in a way that traditional media's failed to some extent? And the cliche is with the younger readers, it's all about celebrity news. Is it more than just Kim Kardashian?
Oh, absolutely it is. And look, you know, one of the first things that I did when I became editor-in-chief, working with my editor Paul Colgan in Sydney, I think that if anything, we've been running more hard news on news.com over the past almost 12 months now. We hired Malcolm Farr, who was the former political editor for the Daily Telegraph. But I think the difference is that there's, if there was one criticism, and it's also for me as a former political journalist, it's a self-criticism, was that sometimes harder stories, be they business stories, be they political stories, be they economic stories, where we get screeds of data from the ABS around things like you know, economic growth or retail performance, often there's a terrible dryness about the way those stories are done. And the starting point so often in sort of old style journalism is not, why does the reader want to read this? How does this directly affect the reader's life? So, you know, looking at policy, looking at economic performance from the position of the end user, you know, that is the reader, and how these things affect their lives is really our starting point at news.com. And, you know, young people, they might want a bit of froth and a bit of frivolity on the way through, and I'm certainly not going to deny that in the great mosh pit that is cyberspace, people don't often access stuff that's beyond titillating. But what you find, though, is that in a way it's sort of like getting some dessert with your main course. Young people will read stories about the carbon tax. They will read stories about Julia Gillard's record, near record level of unpopularity. But yeah, they'll click on the Kim Kardashian yarn as well. So, you know, I think that for a generalist mass market news site, that's just the reality, and we need to cater for that whole spectrum of tastes.
Now, David, you're also featuring journalists more prominently. Is that part of that digital media world and appealing to the emotions of your audience as well?
Yeah, and you know, I think that one thing that does resonate with readers, and this is something that newspapers have done well in the past, is that you know, the readers like to feel that they've got a bit of a relationship with the author of much of what they read. You know, you can engender more of a sense of trust and authority by making a bit of a fuss about the fact that you've got an expert in an area, be it politics, be it technology, be it entertainment. And, you know, I think the other thing too is that News.com has historically sort of been an in-house aggregator to a large degree of News Limited content. You know, we've had this relationship with all of the mastheads where we have received content from the next day's papers and gone about formatting that for a national audience that doesn't access print content either in the printed form or through masthead sites. And I think that what we are trying to do now is we're trying to become much more than that. You know, we've got a lot of really talented people working for us in Liverpool Street, Sydney, who are more than capable of coming up with their own stories, or in this era of aggregation, are capable of looking at the story that's happened in Townsville, the story that's happened in Perth, the story that's happened in Launceston, and going, okay, these three things are happening here, there's a common theme behind them. I mean, the best example is the lead story right now on the homepage is about Ayan Chol, the 4-year-old Sudanese child who was mauled to death by a pit bull in Victoria last week. And what we did at News.com was take a national look at the different laws between all of the states, identify the gaps that exist, go to Ayan Chol's still grieving family and go to the Federal Attorney General Robert McClelland, and we've come up with a really strong piece where the family for the first time has said, we want these dogs banned, and the Federal Attorney General has told News.com we think they should be banned too, and it's going to be something that COAG rather will be pursuing to get that consistency. So that's an example of us not being a passive news site, but rather being an activist site, you know, taking the best sort of campaigning traditions of the tabloids where I grew up and saying, this is a story, we're going to go after it, and it's 100% the work of News.com, and that's why it's the lead story right now.
All right, David, we do appreciate you joining us from Adelaide here on Media Week. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Nadine and James.
As David Penberthy, he's the editor-in-chief of News.com.au. Let's move on, though, and get a check on the media sector's performance on the share market this week. And for that, we're joined by Chris Weston from IG Markets in Melbourne.
Yeah, good afternoon. It's certainly been a pretty quiet week on the news front here in media land, but the stocks have been pretty much very active and all over the place, to be fair. The overall market since last Thursday is down about 1.9% as the macro issues have really plagued investors. Looking at the stock prices, they are mixed, as I say. Seven West Media down about 13%. Traders been happy to take profits and sell out of that stock quite aggressively. Fairfax is relatively flat on the week. News Corp down 2.3% since last Thursday. APN's flat. We've got Seek down about 4.8%. We've got Ozstar doing very well, up 6.8%, and Ten's flat. Now, looking at Fairfax in a little more depth, I think what's been pretty interesting is this turnaround story that we are seeing from there. Obviously, huge cost-cutting measures, huge debt reduction plans coming in place, potentially going to see the IPO of Trade Me and the asset sales of the radio assets. But what I did actually think was quite interesting was that Tony Highwood this week coming out and buying 118,000 shares, topping up his stake there for the first time. And that's a very interesting sign. It shows a good amount of confidence in the management, and it's another piece in the jigsaw if you are a Fairfax shareholder that you should find reasonably optimistic about. Then News Corp's very much been in the spotlight. We did see a memo coming out from the company yesterday suggesting they are putting further cost-cutting measures in places. They've got a staff freeze on at the moment, employment freeze. They are looking to cut 15 to 20% of costs by the next 3 years as well. We did see another allegation or another arrest yesterday in the phone hacking saga. We saw James Murdoch coming out and saying he stands by his rhetoric, that he stands by his testimony that he didn't know anything about the phone hacking incidents. And this comes on the background where we are seeing 2 former executives testifying against the News of the World and the phone hacking allegations. So I can't imagine that's doing the share price any good at the moment, but the stock's down about 2.3% for the week. Ten's an interesting story. Like Fairfax, they're doing big cost-cutting measures coming through. They are closing, or they are making 12% of their staff redundant. They are looking to cut costs by about $18 million. They did come out recently and suggest that their full-year EBITDA, their earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortisation, would be around about $171 million. Now, that's down about 17% from the full year of 2010, showing that their earnings are going backwards. They are suffering quite badly because of TV revenues from advertising. The stock is trading on 9.7 times, which is a huge discount to the long-running average, but I just would not be getting in any kind of stock that's having a big strategic review. We did see recently, I think there was a newspaper, SMI, came out of data this week that suggested they are picking up market share in their revenues, but although the renovators is doing very poorly for them, and they may have to make some of the advertising agencies right on the back of that. But if you look at Citigroup, they came out and said that advertising is going to be very subdued this year. It may go backwards a little bit, and they're calling for about 1% growth this year. The places to be in terms of where advertising spend will be very much on online and outdoor advertising. So APN could be a good place to look if you are looking there as well. And the weakness will really coming through print. But as I said before, a pretty mixed week here in media land.
Chris Weston from IG Markets there. We're taking a short break, but coming up on Media Week, the Australia's Next Top Model weight debate. Could it be the cherry on top for ratings? We'll chat about that one when we get back.